Okay, we are live. Micah Godbolt. Kick us off, and you stop sharing your screen, by the way.
Yeah, I didn't know if you wanted me to be.
Nah. Okay.
Sweet. Do you want me to kick it off, or shall I let the MC do it?
No, you please kick it off yourself.
Okay, can do. Well, thanks everyone for coming to Hill Country JS. Oh, sweet! I can see the room. That's way better than the wall. I think this is what my third time, fourth time presenting to all you guys. It's kind of cool to get a chance to catch in and yeah, obviously.
Third?
What's that? Yeah,
I think it's third.
Okay. Man, lots has changed. I'll tell you that. So we're going to be talking about React today. I've been talking about design systems for the last couple of years. They've been kind of my hot topic. And after writing said book on design systems and whatnot, I actually got a job at Microsoft working with the design system they're building for their Office 365, SharePoint, OneDrive, Outlook web clients.
Hey, just a second.
Yep.
I switched. I switched off a light, and it turned off the TV.
Oh no. Classic move.
Thinking. Okay.
Don't touch that switch. Take two.
Okay. Do y'all like that sound better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that better? Did you switch to the computer or something? Of course, I don't have audio from you now, but
Yeah, sorry.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, we switched to the computer audio, so we're gonna go with that.
Okay, sounds good to me. Anyway, so came in at Microsoft this last 6, 7, I guess maybe 8 months ago now, and had my first taste of React, and it was actually just a really great experience. And I learned a lot, especially coming from a large design system project and coming onto this project, and seeing that the ways that React worked inside of the design system space. It was exciting to see that the set of tools was actually really geared towards building a set of design components, which are really just React controls. So what we have is a separation of the actual application logic in say OneDrive or SharePoint or the Office client online, and then we have a completely separate set of React controls that are completely they're not connected to the application at all. These are controls that they can ingest and use, and it was really neat to kind of see how it worked, and it kind of inspired me to put a talk together that kind of walked through some of the ways that we do it, and some of the pros and cons, and just a good opportunity to have a discussion about how React empowers us to build design systems. I'm going to give a little demo at the end as well, just because I don't have a ton of the slides yet, and we'll take some questions and maybe show some code and just kind of do it a little kind of informal like that. So let's see. Hey, there's the share button. It's been a while. So let's start going. You can see the slides, okay? Thumbs up. Yeah, I can see a thumb. Sweet. So first, what I want to do is see if I can click and hey, there we go. That's me. If you're not following me on Twitter yet, please do. I'm on there a lot. It's kind of my water cooler. It's where I bounce off ideas, get new ideas, ask questions. If people have ideas how to do things, or just share my insights on, oh my gosh, I finally got Webpack working and those types of things. So yeah, check me out there. First, I want to dive into real quick because I don't think I've given my React or my design system talk to you all yet, which is maybe something I should do because it's a really good talk as well. But it really dives into what a design system is, and kind of at the heart of the talk is this one tweet. I was actually asking what people would want to learn in a talk about design systems, and one friend, either smartass or not, just asked, "What is a design system?" I mean, that's kind of the first question, and the definition that I came up with, and somehow condensed in a single tweet, I really feel strongly about and stand behind, and I think it's stood the test of time as I see other people kind of write similar definitions, is that a design system is a set of rules and assets that define how to express everything a visual language needs to say. We've got this visual language, we've got this like, this is what a button looks like, but the question is, how do we get this button into our application? Like, how does that get in there? And we want to be able to express these different UIs and express these different experiences through code. And that's what a design system allows us to do. So have you back another time. I can give you that whole talk. It's a ton of fun. So what's a React powered design system? Well, it's going to be really similar. It's going to be, again, a set of rules, whether you're following BEM or using more OCSS or SMAX kind of setup. Like, these are the rules that define how we put our design systems together. Rules such as like only using single selectors for all of your classes, or single responsibility, single source of truth, kind of all of these things we need to try and keep our code organized and cleaned. But the other interesting thing is, since you're working in React, these are rules not just for your CSS and your markup, but also JavaScript. Like, how are we composing things together? How are we abstracting business logic and those types of things within the components? Maybe not business logic, but more like how you interact with the component. How is that done? How large are the components? How small are the components? How is state passed around, those types of things. There's a lot of rules that go into that really do define how that design system is put together. At Microsoft, we definitely have a lot of these kind of best practices and the things that we do to make our specific system work. And sometimes you don't even realize you're doing them. That's the way that we do it. And we kind of find ourselves, figuring out those rules as we go. So that's rules, and then on the asset side, the thing that you actually create is very similar as well. That you have components. It's a combination of HTML, of CSS, the markup, the styles, but you also have in the React system, you have those interactions. You have what happens when I press this button, what happens when I tab, what happens when I hit spacebar or up and down arrows. You have all those interactions baked into it. So it's a lot more than just your standard standard static design system that needs to go get implemented. There's actually going to be a lot more to it. A lot more of the work actually happens in that interaction space of how can we make these components work in all these application environments. Another thing that you're going to have with a React system, and you can kind of have this with a static system as well, but it's a concept of typings. The idea that a component or a function or really anything where data is passed from one item to another has an idea of a type. Is anyone familiar with TypeScript? And it's TypeScript a little bit. Okay, we could do a whole talk in TypeScript. It's pretty awesome. But the idea of TypeScript is it's a superset on top of JavaScript that allows really strong typing. And the thing, I guess, to think about with typing is that it's not just single variables. It's really neat to be able to say, hey, this thing's a string and it's always going to be a string. And if you try and pass a Boolean, we're going to throw an error at you. But it's a lot more than that. It's like an entire component has a type. Like, I have a button type that defines the data that can go into my button. And so anytime I'm building something with that button, I can validate the data I'm passing into it with that type. This was kind of a neat thing to run into in React, because for the longest time, I've been doing this with JSON schemas and the same kind of concept. You write a component, it's got 5 pieces of data can go into it. 3 of them are required. One's an array, one's an object, so on and so forth. And I wrote a JSON schema that described all of that. This is actually baked into all the JavaScript, which is really powerful because you get if you use VS Code, it's called IntelliSense. It's basically being able to look into a component that you're using and it automatically telling you, oh, you got the wrong type, or you're missing a type, or something like that. So typings and be able to define the data structures of each of these components is really powerful. Another thing you're going to find inside of a React-powered design system is the idea of modules, of being able to take these components not as an entire system that you have to ingest, but as a bunch of small, tiny little pieces that you can pull in piecewise. So if you were to pull down, and I'm going to do a demo of it at the end of this, Fabric React, which is the name of the project that we're building. If you just want that button, you could just pull that button in. Because we've built it in a modular way, whether AMD or totally blank on the other one. We basically create all the different module types that someone would need to import those into your system. We also write tests into it. You can obviously do some really basic testing on a non-React or like a static design system. But within React, there's a lot more testing to do. You're making sure that some utility functions work, making sure that the component, click handlers work, make sure that basically all the functionality inside that component, they can display the way that you expect it to, and those interactions work the way you expect it to. Other assets, and I talk about this in the other talk as well, is the idea of design systems need a place need a storefront. I think Brad Frost actually just had a post about this recently, that you have a workshop, you have this place where it's messy and there's tools everywhere and it's pretty gross. But eventually you're going to need a storefront for these things, something to sell them, something to document them and help people to learn about them and how to use them. So that's obviously going to be another really important part about building a design system, and certainly is not lost when doing something in React. But another really important thing to consider, and this is actually something we struggled with and made some really vast changes on in the last 6 months, is you might have a pattern library and style guide and like module exports and this really pretty complex system of actually creating your released product. That build process can take a long time. There's a lot of things going on. If you're relying on that build process to do your development in, it's going to be really challenging to do. So one nice thing with the React setup, whether you're using Webpack or Rollup or whatever approach you're doing for build, is to make sure that you're focused on what is our dev loop. What is that shortest time between hitting save on a file and being able to see those changes in the browser? Because I can tell you, going from making a change in Sass and waiting a minute for it to finally show up is horrible compared to hitting save and taking 2 seconds for the page to refresh with your change. It makes a huge impact in the productivity and working inside that system. There's definitely some pros and cons. If you are looking to build a design system and you're asking, hey, should I build this design system using React? Some of the pros, obviously, is that React is really amazing at managing state. Really, any JavaScript framework, a lot of what you're doing is trying to manage state. So when you change something, you don't have to manually go and make a whole ton of updates. I remember prototyping out an experience a number of years ago at a previous job, and first doing it in jQuery. And like as this thing got more complex and more complex and more complex, it just became unbearable to try and make a single data change and then realize, oh, I've got to now change all these dozens of other things. Using something like React or even Angular, which I used back then, allows you to very easily have a single function that makes a change to the state, and then everything else within the application updating to reflect that new state. And that's extremely powerful and really a great tool to have in your belt when you're trying to build components, building forms, building lists, building things that people are going to interact with. One of the things that actually I had in the slide, and I might put it back, is that one question when determining whether React is actually a choice for you is ask yourself, what kind of a site are you building? Are you building a website or are you building a web app? Because the two needs for those are dramatically different. When I was at Red Hat, we were definitely building a website. This was a publishing platform that people would read content on, would click on links and go to more content, and click on other links and go to more content. And it was a publication. And because of that, sure, we could have done things in React and it would have been kind of neat, some of the things that it would allow us to do. But in other ways, it would have been completely overkill, because the amount we've actually interacted with the DOM was opening up a menu and clicking on a link. That was about it. But when you move into something like a full application where you're building file explorers, and you need to click on something and open a dialog, and that dialog needs to call a service back to a server and get a link and get a sharing link and all those types of things, that gets really a lot more complex than trying to do a publication site. And something like React makes it a lot easier to manage all those interactions. Another advantage of React is that you're able to get that markup and behavior all in a single place. I haven't worked with Angular 2 yet, but I remember with Angular 1, there's still kind of this big separation of, markup is over here, and then your controllers are over here, and then you have to figure out how to get everything connected and tied together. Whether you like the idea of markup being in your JavaScript or not, it is extremely powerful to get all that into a single file. You've got this one component file that says, hey, this is everything about this component. This is how it looks. This is how it works. These are the styles being pulled in or even just put into the JavaScript. It allows you to encapsulate all the functionality into that one file. The other nice thing is you're not really working with HTML, or at least not strict HTML. It's called JSX. So you can do things like just pretty much writing straight ES6. So like oftentimes if you need to iterate over, say, list items or something like that, you're literally going to take an array of data and pass it to a map function and return a bunch of list items. So it's really pretty powerful to be pretty much always in that ES6 environment so that you're using JavaScript to build out your entire experience from top to bottom. The finished product is always 100% 100% HTML and CSS and with the bindings attached to it. But in the development process, it's a whole lot of fun. Actually, a good question is, how many people have used React? And I guess that's the first question. How many people have used React? Have a few? Okay, cool. So some people are familiar with what it can do. I think, when I go back to look at this talk again, I think I want to dive into React a little bit more, especially because not everyone's used it yet. I'm honestly, till I came into this this job 7 months ago, I'd not touched it once. So it was an eye opener for sure. So the last thing I want to talk about as far as pros is the idea that React by nature and even by definition inside the documentation is very compositional based. It does not recommend using an inheritance model. I'm going to talk about those in a little bit. But one of the reasons that that I found React as such a good tool for design systems is I've always seen design systems as compositional, a bunch of small pieces put together to create larger experiences. And because of that, React is a really perfect tool for that. As far as some of the cons, I'm sure there's a longer list. I kind of want to just hit on just kind of a couple. For one, that second point, there can be a good bit of tooling that goes into this. If all you need is some markup and CSS on the page, you might be better off with just straight up like handlebars or nunchucks or Twig or whatever your programming language kind of supports. Because oftentimes the path to developing that is going to be much simpler. But if you are already have a Webpack environment set up and you're running a node and you want to add one more tool to toolchain, React certainly doesn't break the bank. But the other part here is this idea of supporting multiple platforms. And this is something that we've had to kind of work through and struggle with at Microsoft as well, is because we really just have, it's the best way to say it, we actually have some other projects that we built in the past that are just JavaScript projects. But we have a hard time really supporting those because our products are all moving towards React. And there's a lot of asks and a lot of internal desire as well as external desire. It's like, hey, can't we just get these components as like just straight up JavaScript components, not React? Like, hey, how do I get this into Angular? Like all these questions of like, how do I get these things you're building into X, into my thing? And that's it's been a difficult thing to solve because we kind of have a couple options. We can either build everything, in which case we're building, every time we build a component, we're building a React component, an Angular component, and a Knockout component, and a such and such and such. But again, we're a product company. We build products and our products use React. So that's where our resources are going. We could also try and abstract it out and just have like a pure HTML and CSS layer that gets, say that's our single source of truth, that we write that and then we pull that into React and basically implement that. That's not a bad approach as well, but it's still, you're doing double duty. Every time you're going to build something, you build it in a static environment and then you pull it in React and go like, oh, hey, that actually doesn't work anyway. And you kind of have to go back and forth. And another challenge is that oftentimes the way something works inside of React might be a little different. Like you might need to wrap an extra div around something because you have to return, single elements. You can't return multiple items in a React return. So this whole concept of trying to support multiple platforms can be really difficult because there are different CSS needs, there's different HTML needs for each of these platforms. And if you look at something like Lightning Design, they actually do a really good job of this. I'm sure it's probably because partly their charter basically says that they need to support all these different platforms. That they start with just pure HTML and CSS. Like there is, if you go to their documentation page and you look at a dropdown, the dropdown's already open because there's no actual state in their components. It's just markup. The markup that's then going to go be implemented. So when choosing something like React, definitely remember that you're building React controls. You're really not building static components. And if you do need to support that scenario, it can get a little difficult in the future. So just certainly something to consider. So let's talk about creating components the React way and some of the tools that React gives you. This will be actually probably a good chance to kind of see some of the code and how some of this works. So the first thing I want to talk about real quick is the composition versus inheritance question. To explain composition inheritance, I like to use a couple different analogies. For one, a piece of cake versus a car. A car is really kind of a common inheritance example, because oftentimes when you see it in code, you'll have like class equals car. And then when you inherit that car class, okay, you get the fact that it has 4 wheels, and you get the fact that it has a windshield, and you get the fact that it has, doors and all those types of things. And then you extend it, and then you add more to it, and then you enhance it and add things. Some of the problems with that is, what if your base car class has 4 doors? And you're like, oh shoot, no, I need a 2-door car. So now you are going into either having multiple classes, which is probably annoying, or then you have to override some of the values inside that class, which gets pretty yucky. You don't want to. That's typically not a route you want to have to go to constantly be overriding things. On the other hand, with composition, the idea is that if you're baking a cake, you don't start with a cake and then go, oh, I'm going to take this ingredient out and put this ingredient in, or here's all the ingredients, and I just need to add these 2 things, and we're done. When you start with a cake, you've got an empty bowl. And you go and you grab flour, and you grab sugar, and you grab butter, and you pull all these pieces together to make a final product. And that for me is really composition, this idea of composing out of lots of small pieces. Because often what happens is when you want to make a different cake, you want this cake. Instead of having to like throw everything in a bowl and then start pulling out the pieces that you don't want, you just, again, you start from nothing and you pull in, oh, I need strawberries this time. And oh, it's a bundt cake. So it needs this much flour and this much sugar instead of, the regular amount. Because oftentimes what happens when you try and do this in inheritance is you end up with the Homermobile, and that you're just adding things on and bolting things on, and your class gets more and more complex, and you end up just with something that's not manageable and not maintainable. And that's certainly the React argument as well, and one that I, come from a design system background, feel really strongly about as well. So I'm going to walk through some of the ways that that React recommends basically how to build these components, and some of the kind of the techniques that they use to do so. And the other really neat thing about these techniques is these are all exactly or at least mostly, exactly the same type of techniques I would use when building something in Twig or Nunchucks or something like that. The same concept of composition. It's neat to see that React has a lot of the same principles. So the first one is called containment. And this is straight from React's website. And it was really neat to see them spell this out and give them really good names. The idea of containment is that oftentimes a component is really just a wrapper. It's something that goes around whatever you want to pass into it. So in this case, we've got this fancy border that literally just wraps something in a fancy border that I can pass children into. So you see props.children. Children is a specific property inside of React, which literally is just the stuff in between the opening and closing tags. Because it is tag based, it actually has that concept of what goes in between, as opposed to a lot of other templating languages that are just a single tag. So we're able to take our fancy border and just pass some content into it, a dialog title, a dialog message. And what's going to happen is it's going to then wrap that fancy border around the content we want to pass in. And this is an extremely common use case, whether you're writing a modal, whether you are writing a panel or a card, or really any kind of interface element on your page. You're going to be using this concept of containment. So that, like a really great example is, initially in our design system, they built the dialogue as this thing that pops up and has some text and has buttons at the bottom that you can, say yes or no and, save or cancel, those types of things. But the problem is, you can override the content inside of that, but you would always have all of that code and all those styles that come with the component every time you use it. So sure, you could override the buttons and override the content, but every single time you use the dialogue, it came with all the dialogue, because we weren't using this concept of containment. So in the meantime, or since then, we've abstracted that out. So we actually have a dialogue component. The dialogue component, the modal component. So the modal component is just that shell. It's that thing that pops up that has that, ZNX that is, separate from the rest of the page, that locks the page so you can't scroll, all those types of things. The things you need you actually need that modal for. And then the dialogue is just uses that modal as a container, for containment, and just passes whatever content it wants into it. So you can use the modal and just get that modal, or you can use the dialogue and use it as a containment to pass content into. It's a really common thing that we do. Same thing with again with sidebars, and same thing with cards, and really any type of container that you want to use. Containment's a really powerful thing to do. The other nice thing that Rect allows you to do, and other templating languages kind of have the same concept. In Twig, they were blocks. So this notion of various blocks inside of a component, because sometimes you don't want to just throw content in. Sometimes, say like with a panel, there might be like a header of the panel and a body of the panel and a footer of the panel, because the footer is specifically always at the bottom of that panel, and and the content scrolls and those types of things. So you can't just throw the content in, and you can't expect the user to know the content that needs to be put into the panel. So what you can do is you can create up various regions. So you can see here we've got this split pane as a function, and it takes a bunch of props in, and then in one pane, in the split pane left, they drop in props.left, and then on the right side, props.right, so that when we actually use this, so when we use a split pane down below in our application, we can pass contents into the left section and contents into the right section. And it always blows my mind how powerful and flexible JSX is, and that like we've got here's our split pane element basically, and we have a left value. We can pass markup directly into that, just standard JSX markup directly in. So in this case, it's like our contacts component or our chat component, but that could be a div with a p tag and a link for all it matters. So it's really powerful to be able to create these components that have various regions inside that we can actually populate with the content we need. So that's containment. The other idea is specialization, and I kind of hinted on this one already in this idea of a dialogue, because that's exactly the example that the React website had. And oftentimes, what our components are is just a specialization of a subcomponent. So all we do is we render that subcomponent, but we do something special to it. Like we automatically inject this, or automatically set this, or whatever the case is. So we have a button. There's a base button that has a ton of functionality built into it. But then we have a bunch of specializations of that button that are like primary button and compound button and icon button and all these various specializations. The things that you could build on your own, but they are common UI elements that we want to basically create a contract for. So you can see with this, instead of me having to create a dialogue, quote unquote, just take a fancy border and put an H1 with dialogue title and a P with dialogue message and put your content into there, and you'll get a dialogue. Yay, that's really easy. No, instead of that, you want to lock it down and say, like, here's a dialogue component. It takes two props. It takes a title. It takes a message. And then when you pass that in, I think that is next slide. Yeah. When you invoke dialogue, title, welcome, message, thank you for visiting, then it's automatically going to call that fancy border and pass that markup into those regions. And oftentimes you'll find there's a combination of containment and specialization that certainly can go together. But the specialization allows us to create very single purpose, very focused purpose components, like say a dialogue or I guess a modal or a fancy border, whatever you call this, or a card or a pane or something, and then create on top of that these more specific use case. So if you find yourself building something that's like, oh, we need this thing, it's going to be this size and this shape and this content inside of it. Step back and ask yourself, like, is that thing the content goes inside of? Is that something that we would use outside of this instance? Because if so, we should probably break this up into multiple components. This should probably be the thing, like the card with its borders and its drop shadow and its size and whatever else we're going to do to it. And then, hey, well, let's just create a specialization of that is the version that you want for your specific content. Oftentimes, what we call this at Red Hat was an idea of a pattern. A pattern being something where this is how we use this thing in product. This doesn't even need to be in the design system. We just want to codify. This is the pattern we use in product, where these are the values you pass in. This is how we put things together and where we place those values. And so having that separation between the actual components and the specialization or the pattern you create around it is really powerful, because it allows you to reuse all those pieces that you're creating. Another really neat thing about React that I really love, and this is something that I really actually never did with inside of any other templating languages, is this notion of functional static components. And really, that's a really complex way of saying a component that doesn't have its own state. It's static. It's just a component that you can use to render things. But what I've found them really useful for is when creating a large component is to be able to break off the various regions of that component into separate rendering methods. So in this case, you see that we have 3 different functions here: on render header, on render body, and render footer. And these are also naming conventions that we always use for these little rendering function. The on render footer, here's the function. And that returns, again, some JSX. Now, it could be way more complex than that if you want. You can have logic in there that you can pass the props in and do different things based on the props and so on and so forth. But then the idea is that when you create, say, like your panel, you don't have to cram all of that into this one space. You don't have to have hundreds of lines of markup and JSX and JavaScript just to make this entire component. Breaking them up into these various regions is really powerful. For one, it allows you to see that separation, to realize that the header and the body are completely separate. There's no code from one that gets into the other. They're rendered separately. And it also makes them very easy to override. Something I don't have an example of here, and I should probably do in the future, is that you can actually, I guess one neat thing about React that's different from, say, like using JSON schemas. JSON schemas are just, hey, what data are you passing into a component? With types, you can pass in data, strings and booleans and arrays and objects, but you can also pass in functions. And so the really amazing thing is, if I was to call this panel, I could really easily make it so that, sure, I can pass in, like a title and body content and some link for the button in the footer or something like that. But I also could have a parameter in there that's passing a function, like pass in a on render footer function. So that if I wanted to completely override the rendering of that footer, I could actually pass in my own function to do so. It's something we actually do really commonly in our own components, and it makes our components a lot more easy to use, because, hey, here's how it normally renders. This is the normal functionality and the normal content and all of that. But if you need to override just this one little render region inside of it, hey, there's a function to do that. You don't have to go in and hack something. You don't have to, you don't have to do anything like horrible. We've set up an interface that says, we know you want to do this, and we'll make a way for you to do it. So creating these functional static components is a great way to organize your larger component into various little render functions, and also makes those functions very easy to override in the future. One other thing I was going to touch on, and I started diving into it, I'm not sure how useful it is to talk about, but you'll certainly hear about it in React, is this notion of higher order components. And come to think of it, actually, there's a few places where we kind of do this in our system as well. But a higher order component is a component that takes a component as an input and returns a component as a return. And what this is often really used for is kind of as like a wrapper. We use this for, say, like responsive functionality, where it's like, hey, we want this component to respond to changes in the screen width. And so we don't have to bake that functionality into everything. We can use a higher order component basically to wrap around that component so that it gets a lot of that functionality. You can do the same thing where basically you return the same component but wrap it in some more markup or something. But the idea of a higher order component is that it's a function that allows you to quickly wrap a component in some other functionality or other markup. Couldn't really come up with too many really great examples, so yeah, I might take it out if I can't think of too much else. So anyway, that's most of the slides. Well, that's all the slides I want to go through at the moment. What I do want to give is a quick demo kind of showing how some of these components can be pulled together really easily. Do you want to jump into any questions now, or do you want to wait till afterwards? Continue on? All right, cool. Yeah, the screen's a little fuzzy. I think that was a thumbs up. Nice. So let's go ahead and jump over to this. Of course, I can't click on that. So this is our site. And as I said, this is our storefront. This is the thing we publish. This is the thing we want people to read. This has got a bunch of stuff about getting started and what's in here. I just want to jump into components. These are all the components that we have inside of Fabric right now. We actually have a few more that just haven't quite got to kind of release state yet. But as you can see, I mean, there's simple things in here like buttons. Oh, scroll down to it. But the thing is, they're not super simple as you might think. Buttons, sure, buttons are really like just a little thing to click on. But you know, in an application, pretty much everything is a button. It's really kind of crazy. So we even have the notion of being able to pass in a contextual menu to a button. So again, this is something where React, if you were to do this in just something static, you'd either have to write some JavaScript for this or just display it statically and say, hey, this is how you need to develop it. So in our case, we're able to actually handle the state of, you know, is this thing open? Is this thing closed? And have the functionality built directly into this to be able to work with. Another really neat thing about this, though, is we've been able to put a lot of work into the accessibility of this framework because, you know, we're an application. There's all sorts of people are going to be using this, whether with disabilities or just prefer using keyboards. So with this, you can see that as soon as I click on the button, the focus actually jumps directly into this, into the callout. And with keyboard, I can actually move up and down with that. These are all things we've actually had to write. It doesn't come naturally just with, you know, regular markup. But the really nice thing is that I didn't have to write this functionality to make the button work. We already had this functionality because we already had this component, this call out. And on top of that, we had this focus zone that allows us to create a focus zone that we can, you know, keyboard up and down inside of. So all these tiny pieces we can compose together to create our simple little humble button. So yeah, it's just, I think it's kind of mind-boggling. I think I heard someone talk about the $1 million button at some point. Of the amount of effort that goes into making this button as simple as it is, even as it's pretty complex. Because writing this kind of functionality, you know, and then when you tab out, you actually, you know, you lose focus, or we hit enter, it jumps right in. Hit escape, it leaves. All of that, it takes a lot of work, and to be able to do that in a way that's going to scale across your entire application, because that is the exact same functionality that you see when you have a contextual menu. So same thing here. If we do a contextual menu that flies out, we've got focus right inside of it. I can use keyboard. So this is the exact same code that the button is using. And that's a really powerful thing to be able to do, is to be able to reuse code in that kind of way. So I'm going to do a quick code example showing how you can pull this code together. Who has used the create rack? Seriously, my R's, I can't do them. Create racked app. It's like a node module, allows you to quickly build it. Yes, some good thumbs up. If you're new to React, seriously, this is the best thing since sliced bread. Create React app. Oops. Right here. And it's a node module that you can install and basically say, hey, create me an app. And the great thing about it is that it scaffolds everything you need to, like, with one line of code, start writing writing React. It's got the dev environment set up. It's got the server environment set up. It's got the ES6 transpiling set up. Like, there's nothing you need to do besides start pulling in components and start building. It might not be the thing that you build your application on, but for someone learning or just trying to prototype an idea, it's golden. And it's well maintained. It was updated an hour ago. So it's really a great tool if you're starting to get into it. And so that's what I'm going to show right here is that create React app. Bigger. Yeah, that's probably better. And so this is what it looks like when it starts. This is literally, I did create me an app, and boom, I get all of this. It already installs all the dependencies and all that good stuff. So what I want to do is I'm going to step through a couple of, I guess you probably don't have this link. I'm going to step through this. I was just going to give you the link as well. This is a demo I actually did in build last week. And I'll drop it over here so you can get to it at least at some point. I'm going to walk through just through a set of branches on this that kind of have the code from an evolving state as I build a really kind of simple app out of these components. So let's start. So this is what it starts with. You can see we've got an app component, extends the basic standard React component, and that gives us things like a render function, in which case we return some markup and we get the markup on the screen. We're also pulling in some CSS to it, so it automatically pulls that CSS in for us. So basically, any time that this component gets used, it makes sure that CSS is on the page. Really powerful, really great way to be able to attach CSS directly to that component rather than having to basically rely on some global CSS that you hope or expect to be on the page. All right, so with that said, let's jump to step one. And at this point, I'm going to start pulling in some things from Fabric. So I've installed a few more things. Office UI Fabric React is one of them. Just did npm install for that. Already did it because I don't want to waste time. And then we also have a set of core styles that are like fonts, animations, colors, a couple of kind of just some basic core things. We're hoping to remove that dependency eventually, so you can just bring React in and it comes with all the things. But for now, it's certainly necessary for some of this stuff. So go down the rest of this. Obviously, I could get rid of this logo because I don't use it anymore. That's why it's yelling at me. I'm going to import some components. And one of the great things about, I'm guessing this is probably mostly TypeScript. Sometimes I just don't know. It's magic. Say if I wanted to pull in, there's a tooltip. So you can see you can really easily in here look for, hey, I have tooltip and a tooltip host. Oh, I want the tooltip host. You can actually go in here and see that. And if I was to actually add it, tooltip host, I can see that it has, I don't remember what props this thing actually takes. You can see the props inside of it. It's not just way too many. Title, so there's a title in here. I can add that in. So the all that typing allows you to really easily see, like, what are the values I can pass in each component. All right, anyway, moving on past that. So what I've done is I've created a text field inside of here. The text field you can see has a label, and I've also added a reference to it. This will allow us in the future to be able to get the value that's actually in the text field. I was actually just doing some prototyping a couple of days ago. There's actually a better way to do this. React typically recommends putting the value of a text field into state and just pulling from state in the future. I could do that too. But this gives us a text field. So we can actually type in a text field. So that's that. That's not much of an application. So let's make sure I didn't add anything. There we go. And let's jump to the next part. Step 2. All right, we've got a button. Sweet. Oh, let me, apparently I made a change in there. There we go. So now we have a button. So pulling in a primary button, you can see, again, kind of that, like, I want to put text in. Oh, hey, there's text. And you actually see that text is a string. So you can see our typing right here. That, it's not an object. It's not a JSX component. It's just a string. So if you were to try and say, pass in, please yell at me. There. Come on. I actually go in. Oh, that's weird. I guess the Java TypeScript or React will just pull that out. That's cool. All right. So we've got a button, and I've got an icon I've added to it, some text. And then the great thing with this is that they're not just static buttons that don't do anything on the page. We can also add on-click handlers to it. So in this case, I'm just going to do a quick alert that says hello. And so when I click on it, it's going to grab that value and put that in an alert box. So really simple application, real simple, like, hey, it's doing something on the page, which is very fun. So let's move to the next step. On step 3, I actually want to do something with that value. I don't just want to throw it into the sky. I actually want to save that value in state and create a to-do out of it. So a couple things I've done. I've added to-do in I've added state in the constructor. So I've got state equals this object, and I can list all my to-do items in there. Or all my state items in there. I just have a to-do which is currently set to null. It's just a typeless right now. So that, let's see, where should I jump to next? So then on click, actually let's jump down here. This makes more sense. Now I'm going to also add an add to do function. So this function takes a to do and will just set the state to whatever I pass in. So jump back up. Here's my primary button. On click, it's going to take whatever that latest value is of that field and drop it into my to do. Into that add to do function. ABC, get fabric. And you can see that the value from that field is automatically passed to state. And then once it's in state, my checkbox kicks in. So the label of the checkbox is set to whatever string I pass in the state. Very simple to do app. And then whenever there's a change to this checkbox, you can see that I'm going to fire a function off. I don't have any way to remove remove it yet, but I at least wanted to kind of show how that works. I see squinting. Should I go a little bigger? I can do this. Boom, big. A little better. Close enough. Okay, cool. So let's jump to the next part. Make an actual to-do app with actual, I want to be able to check this thing off and get something done. So I've done a couple things here. I have a new function that just says remove to-do. And this is going to set the state back to null. And at that point, basically the to-do is gone. As I said, it's a very simple to-do app. You can only have one to-do in at a time. I did a couple other things. For one, I've set the click event for that actually the on change event for that checkbox to remove to do. So as soon as that checkbox changes, it'll remove the to do, and you will have done it. The other thing I've done is I don't really want that checkbox to be on the page unless there's an actual to do item in my list. So you see, I can actually, this is kind of that neat thing where you can combine JavaScript and your markup. I mean, this is basically markup. I could wrap this in a div and a p tag and whatever I want to do. But I can also wrap it in this bit of JavaScript. So saying like, I only want this to show up on the page if this thing is true. So if this is true and this is true, then it just evaluates that second item. And that's really the fun part about this is when we start writing out the contents of the component, you're not limited to just markup. You can start using JavaScript to iterate through things, to check things, to like this label could, you could actually throw a JavaScript function in there to check something. And if it returns true, then, change the label or something, or to do, use a like to uppercase function on the string, or whatever you want to do. There's a lot of options there. But you see, so that to do doesn't show up until we have a state. So when I say get fabric, it shows up. You can see all these focus rectangles, good stuff. When I hit spacebar, that thing gets selected and automatically disappears. Smart thing might be to put a little delay on it so that you can see the animate like check and then disappears. It's a simple app. All right. So speaking of animation, we actually will do one more step that has some more animation to it. I remember I had a progress indicator up top because everyone likes to see their progress indicator go to 100% and like, feel completed. So what I've done with the progress indicator is I've taken that value in the state to do and basically check to see if it's null or if it returns value, in which case it's true. So I've got a label on here that's either going to be equal to 0 or 1 times 100. So since I'm either done with my to-dos or have all my to-dos to do, that gets really easy. And then I also have this progress indicator can take a percentage complete. And that percentage complete is if I can see, hover over it. Yeah, look at that. Yeah, it takes a number. And to be more specific, it takes a number between 1 and 0. So if there's not a to-do, or if there's a to-do, it's at 0. And if there's not a to-do, it'll be at 100. So let's add a to-do. And let's make sure it shows up. Hey, there we go. What's that to do? So as soon as I add this to state, you can see the animation. We're going to go down to 0% done. And as soon as I click it being done, you can see it animates all the way back up. So again, a nice thing about components is being able to wrap up all that functionality in it. Not only being able to, define define how it works, how it takes a function. Yeah, I guess that. Okay. Not only to be able to say, how can I define this percentage completion, being able to pass in numbers like that, but also to be able to animate it as it changes. You can pack a whole bunch of functionality into a component this way, and then reuse that in all the different circumstances that you have. All right, so that's it. That is my very, very super simple to-do app. I can do to-dos, add that to my to-do task, and then awesome. And it's 7. So I think that's 7 my time. I think we're pretty good. Anyone have questions about this or questions about any of the slides previously?
Okay, we're unmuted. Any questions?
I explained everything so perfectly.
So perfect.
So I guess kind of to reiterate with these components, I think what's really kind of neat about this is these are all like very unopinionated components. Yes, we use these in Office applications, but there's nothing Office about them at all. There's no API calls. We're not fetching some things from some REST server. These are all just design system components, something to create UIs out of, pass data into, and get responses back from, call functions off of. And React is really, really good about creating these really self-contained components that can be used in really any application within your entire organization. As I said, it started in SharePoint and OneDrive inside of our organization, but has since spread to Office 365 apps and Outlook Online and Visual Studio VSCS. It's really been kind of powerful to see how many people started to use this, and even just like, hey, I'm some developer that wants to prototype some idea. I do crazy things with AI, and I just want to be able to display some content. These are great tools. They're able to just pull in really easily, tap into their data source and render their data out and make something that looks good and it's usable and it's even on brand within Microsoft. So it's been a ton of fun to work with. If you haven't gotten into React, honestly, I think it's one of the more approachable JavaScript frameworks. And I would certainly recommend getting into it as much as you can. I know Westboss has a really good tutorial on it. It's maybe like 50, 60, 70 bucks, something like that, but really gets you going really quick. Otherwise, there's tons of really good tutorials out there. You can certainly download this. And all I've done is the create React app and added some components to it. And I have a, hypothetically working application. So if you don't have any questions now, I think I'm going to go and try and put some kids to bed. But feel free to reach out on Twitter. Check out that repo on GitHub, and happy reacting.
Thank you very much.
All right, and get me back in here sometime, and I'll do the design system talk because that thing's fun too.
Okay, sounds great.
All right.
Have a good